Oh, hey, Al.
Hey, Jerry.
How you doing?
Good. What's happening?
Nothing much. Just thought I'd ask you a few questions. Let me put this thing on a tripod here.
Well, I get a prize for each one I answer right, or
Absolutely.
do I get a penalty for not answering right?
Okay.
Well, you took my book. You
Sorry.
took my book away.
So, what was your full name, date of birth, and location of birth? Where were you born?
Well, my full name is Alfred Paul.
Bump on the birth certificate.
I was born on December 3rd, 1928 in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Now, you don't have a real middle name?
Yeah, I have a middle name, which is an old family name, Nairn. Bumpa is just a, as you know, that's just the.
How do you spell Nairn?
Nairn.
And was that someone's last name?
Yeah, my grandma, my father's mother, that was her last name.
Did you know all your grandparents?
Yeah, I didn't know his parents as well because they died when I was quite young. I knew my mother's parents better.
Do you know where your dad's parents were born?
His father was born right in Wakefield, New Hampshire, and his mother came from Washington. I assume she was born down there.
In Washington, D.C.?
Washington, D.C., right.
And they lived up here in Wakefield?
Somehow, I don't know the story of how they met, but my grandfather had occasion to go to Washington, and he met her down there, and I guess he married her and brought her up to Wakefield. I'm not dead certain how that happened or whether she had come up here and he met her up here, but somehow they did meet, either through a relative or a mutual friend, and that's what happened. That would have been back in, my father was born in 1890. They must have been married somewhere in the early 1880s.
And now your dad's parents, they both died when you were pretty young, so you don't really remember them too well?
I don't remember them well at all. I can hardly remember what either of them looks like. I may have been 6 or so. My grandmother died first, and then my grandfather.
And they lived in Wakefield?
Yeah.
Now, your mom's parents, though, you did get to know?
Yeah, yeah.
And
they're all from Rochester, New York.
Well, let's back up to your dad's parents' names. Do you know their names?
Hiram Arthur was his father, and Annie Nairn was his mother.
Okay. So Hiram Arthur Paul.
Right.
Of course. And your mom's parents, their names?
Her father was Alfred Frank, and of course I was named after him. He was a German Canadian, and my grandmother was Catherine Mers. She was daughter of a German immigrant,
and you remember them fairly well. They lived
yeah,
until you were
quite
teens,
well.
or?
No, but they spent a lot of time with us. When I was, let's see, Grandpa died when I was only about 8, I guess. So I'd spent quite a bit of time with him. He was a newspaper man, and I guess he was probably semi-retired because he had summers off, and he would come down from, both would come down from Rochester and spend the summer with us at Fort Wayne. And he died in 1936 in Fort Wayne that summer. My grandmother lived quite a while longer. She died in 56 or 57.
So they lived in Fort Wayne most of their life?
Well, after he retired, they still continued to live in Rochester. They owned a house there, and
Rochester, New Hampshire.
Rochester, New York.
Rochester,
and
New
only
York.
spent summers in Fort Wayne. Then after he died, why, of course, my grandmother came to live with us, and she sold their house at Rochester.
And lived with you, which was where?
Which was first Fort Wayne, and then we moved to Norwalk, Connecticut in 1938.
Do you remember any interesting stories about it?
Well, Grandpa was a great gardener. He was a newspaper man by profession. Originally, he had been a typesetter with the old hand-set type. The linotype machines came in probably in the 1890s, early 1900s. So when the linotypes came in, he was too old to learn the linotype keyboard and linotype operation. So he became a proofreader and finished out the rest of his career as a proofreader. It's a funny thing how things go around and come around. My wife's uncle was a linotype operator. When the linotypes became replaced by computer-operated typesetting, it was impossible for him at his age to learn a typewriter keyboard. So the union saw to it that he continued to work as a linotype operator, and he probably ran the last linotype machine in the city of Bridgeport, but he kept on working till retirement age, still punching away at that linotype thing.
Everything was computerized. When you were growing up as a child, who was the oldest person that you can remember? Would it have been your grandparents?
Yes, yeah, my grandfather and grandmother.
And they would have been born in the early 1800s?
She was, I think they were both born in the same year, 1870, and which was also the same year that my great-grandmother and great-grandfather emigrated from Germany. It's very possible that she was pregnant with my grandmother when she came to the U.S. She had an older sister who was born in Germany, and she also came to the United States. She spoke fluent German, but my grandmother learned German somewhat, but I don't think she spoke it very well. She said she doubted if a German could understand the kind of German that she spoke.
Did they ever tell you any stories about growing up in the late 1800s, or do you remember?
There were a lot of them. I don't know how they met. He being a Canadian, he came from Hamilton, Ontario, and I know practically nothing about his family. He had a couple of brothers over there. I don't know anything about his parents. There's very little I know about Alfred Frank. Somehow they did meet anyway, and I guess they were, as far as I know, they were married in Rochester, and that's where they lived. Her mother's maiden name was Stakel. All Germans. Legend has it they came from Frankfurt, Germany in a sailing ship, but I have no idea if that's true. That's what my father always said. They came over in a sailboat. Well, Joseph Paul, my father, was born right here in Wakefield in 1890, and my mother, Edna Frank Paul, or Edna Frank at the time, was born in Rochester, New York, also I believe in 1890. They were within a couple of months of the same age. My mother would never admit that while she was alive, but I hope she'll forgive me now that she's been dead for all these years.
Did she lie about her age? She said she was younger than she
yeah,
was?
she did.
Good for her.
She did.
Now, where did they live most of their lives? Where did they grow up?
Well, they married in Rochester and bought their first house in Rochester. My father went there after World War I to take his first job with the company
Rochester,
in
New
Rochester.
York.
Yeah, he worked for the General Railway and Signal Company. He was an electrical engineer with them, and I think he met my mother at church, or he met my mother's aunt at church. And her aunt apparently took to him and saw to it that she introduced him to my mother. I think that's how it went. And they would have been married then in 1920, after the war.
Okay, so they were about 30 years old when they were married.
Yes.
Old
Yeah.
for back then.
Yeah.
And were they living in Rochester at the time?
They moved to Fort Wayne. He took a job with another company, Tokheim Oil Tank and Signal Company. They make oil pumps. You see them at gas stations, the Tokheim pump. They're still in production. And at the time, they also made traffic signals, and that was his specialty, signaling things. So that's why he went to Fort Wayne, and that's what occasioned them moving there, and I was born there.
And they lived most of their lives there.
Came to Norwalk, Connecticut in 1938. Here again,
Good
the
chunk,
traffic
yeah.
signal business, he worked for a company in East Norwalk. Made traffic signals.
So it sounds like they lived longer in Norwalk than
They did. Yeah.
mom work at all?
No, she did. She was a singer, and she sang quite a bit in churches. In those days, they paid the soloist. She had a very good soprano voice, and she worked in several churches as a soloist and choir director. She didn't play the organ, but she directed the choir.
Did she sing popular music as well, or did
Some, but mostly church music and classics. Well, he was an electrical engineer and graduated MIT in 1913. And then, as I said before, his first job was in Rochester, New York. And I guess he went there and met my mother before World War I. Then his courtship was, of course, interrupted by World War I, and he served in France and in the Signal Corps of the U.S. Army.
did he have any stories about World War I?
Oh, a few.
Anyone remember?
He was an instructor. He was a radio instructor, and radio in those days consisted of a spark coil and a telegraph key, and it was all by very crude telegraph.
Right,
wireless
very
telegraph.
important for advanced technology,
Yeah,
communication.
Frontline communications. There would be a guy sitting in a tent with an antenna stretched out in front of him, pounding this key. And I guess the radios might have had a range of 100 miles. I have no idea. Those crude old radios, maybe not even 100 miles. And he taught radio and was a radio operator. He never served in the trenches. He did not serve in the front lines and never really suffered the way those doughboys did. He was always behind the lines in a less dangerous position, although he was shelled a few times, but nothing like the boys in the trenches did.
Now, what did he do for fun?
Well, of course, he came from a farm, and his fun thing was still things that he did as a boy. He used to fish and hunt, but most of all, he loved his garden. And the first house they owned, he had a garden, and he always had one.
And was he good at it?
Oh, he knew all the tricks of an old New England farmer. We used to like to hike a lot, and he was a good swimmer. And those were the things I remember. Always an excellent woodworker too, and built a lot of furniture and other things. So I guess probably woodworking was his all-time hobby, and hiking and swimming his summertime hobbies. And he got to be quite a fisherman also.
Now, while we're talking about your parents and grandparents, tell us about this cabin that we're at, and who exactly built that. Tell us about it.
Well, of course, this is only about 5 or 6 miles from where he was born. And when second year I was out of college, I bought a brand new car. It was a 1952 Ford.
Nice.
And I brought them up here in my brand new car. And he had always been interested, I guess, in the land, especially in the lakes. And he got together with a real estate guy and looked at this property and subsequently bought it. And then after he retired in 1955, he started to build this cottage. And he worked on it for the rest of his life, but he had it so it was occupiable. I think in 1956 it was much less than what it is now. It didn't have the porch, it didn't have the rooms in the back, the bathroom, didn't even have a bathroom. So then he kept adding to it every year from that time onward.
So he pretty much did all the work himself.
Just about all the work. He had a little help in setting the septic tank. He may have had his brother, who lived up here at the time, his brother probably gave him some help.
Now, did he have a lot of brothers and sisters?
Yeah. There were 7 kids in all, 2 girls and 5 boys. So he had 4 brothers and 2 sisters.
Generally all in the West.
They all were born here, but they all went to various parts of the country to work, except for his brother Sam. Sam stayed here. They all graduated from college. Of course, his father wasn't a wealthy man. He had a 40-acre farm, and he worked as a postal clerk on the Boston and Maine Railroad. He sorted mail. But his father had a brother, a twin brother, in fact, and his Uncle Amasa. He was a very successful attorney in Minnesota, and he saw to it that all those boys, the 5 boys and the 2 girls, got through college. And so for a bunch of kids off of a farm, that was quite unusual. But they all made it. 2 girls went to Wellesley. Dad, as I said, went to MIT, and one of his brothers went to MIT. Sam, the one who stayed up here, went to UNH, University of New Hampshire. The other brother went to Dartmouth. They all got pretty good education.
Did your mom have brothers and sisters too?
She had 1 brother, Uncle Gordon.
She had lots of aunts and uncles then.
Yeah, but I didn't know any of them. They all lived in far-flung parts of the country.
So you never really got to meet them.
They, I got to know my Uncle Gordon, my mother's brother. But the New Hampshire uncles, I only saw occasionally. They would come to visit us for a few days, perhaps. But
Picnics at the cabin or stuff?
no, that was before that. And one wound up in Minnesota, 2 more down in Pennsylvania. The one as I said before, stayed up here in New Hampshire. 2 sisters, one of the sisters, Aunt Louise, she was one of the first women to get an MD. She got that at the University of Minnesota, and came back here to practice medicine. She was a country doctor.
And she has some places in Wakefield named after her.
I guess she does. And her brother Sam has the Paul School named after him. So that's the family.
And how long did your parents live? When did they pass away?
Dad, or my mother, passed away first, which would have been 1983. I'm sorry, 1973. And my father lived on to 1976, so he died at 86. So she at 83.
So you were an only child, right?
I was,
Any
yeah.
brothers or sisters that we can talk about?
Yeah. Curious thing, out of all those boys and women in my father's family, his 2 sisters married late in life, and they had no children. One of his brothers, are we on? Or,
yeah, keep going.
Okay, one of his brothers had no children. One of his brothers had 2, and the other brothers each had 1. So I don't have that many cousins. I've only got 2 left now. The ones 2 of my cousins have died already.
Oh, that's a shame. So you only had like 3 or 4 altogether?
Yeah, yeah. There were 2 of us boys and 1, 2, 3 girls.
Okay. Now let's talk about your childhood years. You were born in Fort Wayne.
Right.
And what year was that again?
1928.
So, right at the beginning of the Depression. Did you feel much effect of the Depression at all growing up?
We were very fortunate. The traffic signal business was one business that thrived during the Depression because there was so much road building and public works, as road building as a part of public works. And traffic signals were just becoming necessary and popular with the municipalities. So my father, yeah, he had full employment through all the Depression, and yeah, we were fortunate. My grandfather, as a newspaperman, was employed too, and of course my other grandfather's a farmer and a postal worker. He had pretty much full employment during those years, so our whole family was very fortunate.
You spent most of your childhood years in Fort Wayne until you were how old?
Well, I was, let's see, 1938, I was 9 when we came to Connecticut.
So what were the years like there?
They were great.
You were living in suburban life? Or?
Yeah, well, nice house out in the south side of Fort Wayne, and had friends that...
Did your dad have a car?
Yeah.
So you weren't like getting around on horse and buggies? Or
actually, oh yeah, well, he had a couple of little business coupes. My mother drove a sedan.
Nice.
The sedan was a 30. Well, the last one she had was a 37 Chrysler, and he had a 36 Plymouth, which he kept it after they came to Connecticut, and finally turned it over to me my senior year in college, and that would have been in 1950. I finally got a hold of that 36 Plymouth, and I was a pretty happy boy. I could make it go 40, 50 miles an hour, and if I got much faster than that, the main bearings knocked so badly I didn't dare go any faster, but we kept it moving anyway.
So life was pretty good in Fort Wayne back then.
Yes, it was.
A rural, suburban type life, or
Well, it was
somewhere in between.
it was an urban.
More
Well,
urban.
it was a housing area that it was a good residential area, and houses were typically on maybe a half acre of land and that sort of thing. So it was comfortable, and then Fort Wayne in those days was a pretty nice city. I think it has declined as a lot of large-sized towns have in recent years, but back then it was a good city. And then we also had a little cottage on a lake in northern Indiana.
Nice.
And I think that influenced him towards building this one.
Probably no connection back to Indiana at any point. No friends left from that era.
I've lost track of all my friends. Yeah.
Well,
I'm
8 years
sorry
old.
I have.
They're not 8 years old anymore.
You know, I wasn't much of a correspondent and not much of a letter writer.
Well, not at 8.
And
Moved at that age.
most of my friends were about the same. We didn't have email. And of course, it was prohibitive to call them on the phone. So I really lost track of them.
What about Norwalk? Was that a tough move, going from Indiana to Norwalk?
Not for me.
Did
I
it
like
bother you at all?
Norwalk. My mother had a little time problem adjusting. She loved Fort Wayne, but she got into musical circles and developed a lot of acquaintances who were mostly involved in some type of music. That was her thing. And, it was pretty good. Norwalk is right on Long Island Sound, and that was a great place for swimming and boating, especially the boating. And I learned how to sail a boat early on and all that stuff. It was a good place.
Family?
I had a paper route, and then I also kept chickens. During the war, of course, you could do this. Well,
That's right. This would have been.
there weren't any zoning laws that were enforced. If you wanted to keep a few chickens, or in some cases maybe even a goat or two, you could do it on a half-acre lot, which was about what we had. And our neighbors were happy enough to get the fresh eggs, so they didn't mind the chickens. I had a small flock of them, maybe between 12 and 18 of the laying hens, and that kept me busy. And
So there was a slightly rural type area in Norwalk.
yeah, here again in Norwalk, it was a residential area, but the houses were spread out, and there were a lot of vacant lots all over the place. It wasn't built up, so
Back then it
there were
wasn't that
places to
uncommon
play.
to have chickens.
Yeah,
As
sure.
it would be now.
Yeah.
During high school, did you have a best friend during those high school years?
Oh, a couple. Yeah, we hung out together.
Do you stay in touch with them at all?
I've been in touch from time to time with 2 or 3 of those high school buddies. A couple of them have died, sadly, but I still know the whereabouts, and I should contact them now more than I used to, because you never know when you're going to go, and I'll say, gee, isn't it a shame we never got together for lunch or something like that.
So what were your schools like, and how did you get to them?
Always walked. There were no school buses except for kids that lived more than or maybe more than a mile away, and I never lived more than a mile from school. High school, it was a half a mile, and grade school, it was just about a mile, and in 5th and 6th grades, I was certainly old enough to walk to and from school. That was no problem.
High school, do you remember any fads? Anything that was really hip and happening? There was
Peg pants.
peg pants. What are peg pants?
They were closed at the cuff. They were you could barely get your foot through the cuff, and baggy the rest of the way up. And my parents they frowned upon that. I had a pair of pants that were pegged a little bit, but they weren't extreme. And we wore shirts with ties, and I had the most gaudy ties you'd ever want to see. And being colorblind, I didn't think they were so bad, but they were pretty bad, and I wore them. No, I'm not much of an athlete. I played in the band, and that was sort of a sport. Anyhow, it was the fun thing that I did. As far as sports go, we just sandlot baseball and football, which was unsupervised. In many ways, it was better. We just made our own teams and determined our own games, and there are meetings with other teams. And usually we'd find an older boy to act as a umpire or a referee, and we'd play these games on any piece of ground we could find. No yard markers. The bases were laid down any way we could put a base down, and may have been 30 or 40 feet to a base, or maybe less, and the pitcher stood wherever he felt like standing. Yeah, I played clarinet. Later I acquired an alto sax, and Norwalk High School band was pretty good, I would say, and we had a good bandmaster, and of course he was a good teacher of the various instruments in the band, and played at all the football games. Of course, it was during the war, so we couldn't travel very far. They would manage to get a bus that would give us transportation to games that were close, within 15 miles or so, but there were no long trips. And these old rattle-trap buses were kind of a challenge, but we enjoyed them.
World War II started when you were early into high school.
Let's see. No, I was in 8th grade. World War II started, and it lasted until the summer before my senior year. And it was the war years were interesting. Lots been written about the war years, so I don't have to go into that.
Well, tell us, how did it affect your life growing up?
Well,
of course
I was too young to serve.
You were too young to serve, so it was an indirect type effect.
Yeah, yeah.
Things like gas rationing and food rationing and all that.
That's what it was. With our 2 cars, we had enough gas for the local transportation. There was a ban on pleasure driving anyway, so you couldn't legally drive off to something like say, a sporting event.
I'm sure people violated that.
Oh, they did. And if you wanted to go on vacation, you could get a permit. And the permit allowed you to drive a certain number of miles, X number of hundreds of miles, and you were allowed to hoard your ration stamps for that vacation. Ordinarily, you were not supposed to hoard stamps, and you were not supposed to store gas. If you had a surplus, if your tank was full and you still had a few stamps left, you weren't supposed to drain your tank and keep it. And it was terrible stuff. It was 1 grade above kerosene, but somehow we made the cars run on it.
So it didn't really affect you too much. Did you know anyone who
I rode a bike most of the time.
Did you know anyone who was killed or injured in the war?
Yeah, we knew a couple of older boys that didn't come back.
And did industry change much in Norwalk? Did your dad's business change? Or,
Well, it intensified, and of course the traffic signal company was involved making signaling devices for the Army. They had big contracts for that. And it was no longer traffic signals, but various devices that were used by the artillery and other Army activities that needed signaling of one type or another. Summer, of course I was 16 now, I could work full-time, and I got a job driving a pickup truck for a local hardware store. And my job was delivering hardware to their customers.
That must have been kind of fun.
Oh, it was a lot of fun.
A lot of independence for a 16-year-old.
Oh, that was big stuff to be a truck driver.
What was the first car you remember driving?
There was that 36 Plymouth that my father had then, which I finally inherited.
You
Then when I got a little older, I went to work as an engineer's assistant with the local power company, Connecticut Light and Power.
In high school, an engineer's assistant?
Well, no, I was, let's see now. No, that was after my sophomore year of college. The hardware store was in the summer before my senior year and in the summer after my senior year. And then after I went to college, I landed this situation with the local power company, and it was a good summer job, and it would have led to a permanent job. They made me an offer when I was about to graduate, but they couldn't offer me a draft deferment. So I went with a company that did have enough wartime contracts. This is during the Korean War, of course. They had enough
okay, so this was
military
after
contracts,
college.
so they were able to get me
right.
Yeah, they got me a deferment after college.
Right.
Yeah, I'm jumping ahead of this, yes.
Right. But in high school, mostly it was driving the truck.
Driving the truck, and then, yeah, that was it.
What about dating in high school? How old were you when you started dating?
Once I got my hands on a driver's license,
Yeah.
I dated quite a bit. Before then, I didn't. I was a little slow to get going in that department. And when I got that driver's license, I did everything I could to make up for lost time and dated quite a bit.
Do you remember the name of the first girl you kissed?
Yeah, her name was Joanne, or Joan. Her last name was Hannah, Joan Hannah.
Joan.
There you go.
And, I imagine you're not in touch with her, though, anymore.
No.
Martha'd be jealous, though.
No, I don't know what happened to her.
Did you have a steady girlfriend in high school at all?
For a while I did.
And what was her name?
Her name was Ethel Bell.
Ethel Bell.
Don't know what happened to her either. We went together for a few months there. And there's another one. Oh, sure. Martha knows this one, and she has met this girl because she was in my class, and she has come to 2 of the reunions that we attended. And her name was Patty Cooley. Her name is now McGraw, and she lives up in northern New York State.
Now, when you graduated high school, did you go right to college?
Yeah, I started Purdue in the winter term. I spent the first term out of high school in the Norwalk Community College. It was just started then. And I was all set to go off to University of Connecticut, and I had an appendectomy just before I was supposed to go up there.
Right, you graduated high school,
Yep.
and you were supposed to go to UConn
Yep.
for 4 years.
Yep,
And you had an emergency appendectomy.
right.
Okay.
And that set me back just enough so that it was probably not prudent to go up there 2 weeks late and with a sore side.
Right.
Because you didn't recover from an appendectomy as fast then.
Right.
It wasn't laparoscopic surgery.
Right.
So then they that same year they started the community college in Norwalk, and I attended that for my first semester. And then in the meantime, I got accepted to Purdue University and went out there in February, the following February.
Huh.
Transferred most of the credit that I'd gotten at the.
Huh. And you started in February as a freshman, or
Yeah.
as a midterm freshman, or as a beginning freshman?
It was really midterm, but I didn't have enough credits to really satisfy the entire first half of the freshman year. So I became a half. My following year, I still had some freshman courses to complete, plus I started on the sophomore courses. And the long and short of it was that I took an extra semester before I finally graduated.
So if you hadn't had the appendectomy, you would have spent.
Would have gone to UConn.
You would have gone to UConn. Your whole life would have been different.
Maybe.
In
You
some
never know.
ways. Yeah,
I
interesting.
might have gone to the same, might have taken the same job, and might have met Martha in the same way that I did. Who knows?
You never can tell. Tell us more about Purdue in college years. You played in the band all through college?
My first 2 years I played in the Purdue band. Then I got interested in making money, so I played in dance bands around the campus, and finally had one of my own the last half of my junior year and all through my senior year in that little band. Well, that's the weight.
That must have been fun playing in the dance band. Now, what years were you in college? What?
Well, let's see. I started there. I graduated high school in '46. I was in class of '46, and graduated Purdue in '51. So
At that point, military service was not a concern. The war's over. Korean War had.
It wasn't over, but students got a deferment. When I got out, I took a job that gave me a deferment.
Right. Now, you enjoyed being at Purdue?
Yeah, it was a good school.
And tell us what it was like being a dance band. Were you like a rock star?
Well, they didn't have
campus?
rock then. It was a little 5-piece combo.
Right, but you were I know they didn't have
I
rock
said-
then,
I
but
sort of
were you like the equivalent of a rock star? It's
No,
like,
well, I emulated Benny Goodman. He was my
Right.
hero, and although I couldn't play the way he did, I played the type of music that was popular
Right,
through
swing.
the 30s and through the 40s, and bop was coming in the 50s. I was not a bop band,
Right.
but there were 3 of us on campus, pretty good bands. Mine, I played traditional 1940s music, music of the big bands and that. There was a bop band who was very good, and there was a Dixieland band. And between the 3 of us, we had a lot of jobs, and we were cross-booked. If I had a job and had an opportunity for another one, I could book one of these other 2 outfits, perhaps, or they would book me. And so we kind of cooperated, and it was good for all 3 of us.
Nice. And were you treated like rock stars as musicians, or were musicians didn't
We
have
were
the
not
same
stars in
No,
any-
you didn't have the same cachet that musicians have
Oh,
now.
gosh, no. No.
The girls weren't whispering. There goes Alfred.
I'll tell you, the groups today are better. Their musicianship is better than it used to be for us. I hear them and watch them, and they are darned good. And there are high school groups that are just amazing. And it's rock. It's not my kind of music, but I can certainly appreciate
Right.
musicianship.
Now you studied engineering in school.
Yep.
Get good grades.
I had too many other things on my mind.
Music and girls.
Music, well, the girls' part was tough out there. The ratio was 7-to-1, men to women at Purdue. When I got that 36 Plymouth here again,
That helped.
it was like deja vu. It was like when I first got my driver's license when I was in high school. Well, this time I get a car to run around in. That did change things some, but I was also busy playing in the band, and so I didn't have as many nights to date as I would otherwise have had. But we had some fun.
Where'd you go?
I went home. I took a job up in Danbury and lived with my parents in Norwalk.
And that job
That
was
was-
engineering or
I
driving?
was in engineering. I was in I was an electrical engineer and had majored in power engineering, and I wound up in electronics, about which I knew very little, but the company I went to work for said that's okay, you get on the job training, and so I became really an electronic engineer. There's not a whole heck of a lot of difference, but you work with little things, little tubes, and later transistors, where the sort of engineering I had prepared for was more the design of large machinery and power distribution systems. That's why I had gone to work for Connecticut Light and Power, and I almost went with them, and that would have changed my career entirely if I had taken a job with them. But
What was the name of the company you did work for?
Sperry Products in Danbury. It's a small company. They're still in business.
And how long did you stay with them?
I was there for, let's see, 4 years, I guess 4.5 years. And then I went down to work for Perkin-Elmer Corporation in Norwalk. And that's the same time I got engaged with Martha.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. When did you meet Martha, and do you remember where and how you met her?
Yeah, quite well. 1954. A good friend of mine and I both had sailboats, and we rented a barn where we kept them over the winter, and we worked on our boats, and those old wooden boats required a heck of a lot of work. And he one day he said, "Say," he said, "are you going out with anybody in particular?" And I said, "Certainly not." He said, "Well, there's this very nice girl that works in the office where I do. He worked for a newspaper, as did Martha." He said, "How'd you like to come over for dinner sometime and meet her?" And I was skeptical of blind dates, but I agreed because he was such a good friend of mine, and I didn't want to turn him down. And so we had dinner, and Martha and I hit it off right away. I was dating her the following week, and kept right on.
So your first date was a blind date at
This
dinner
friend's
at his
house for dinner, yeah.
And the first date, just the two of you? Do you remember where you went?
I think we went to a dance down at the Shore and Country Club where I kept my boat. If I recall, I think that's what we did. I know we went to quite a few dances down there. And finally, the guy that introduced us became my best man. We met in May, and we were married the following April. We were engaged the following October, and married in the next April. So we'd known each other for 11 months about that when we were married.
Did you have a big wedding?
I guess it was medium-sized. There were probably, I don't remember, maybe 120 guests or so.
Tell me about it. In Norwalk, or?
Actually, we were married in Martha's church in Fairfield, the First Church of Christ, and then the reception was at a place in Westport called the Women's Club. It was a women's club facility that was a good hall. Westport Women's Club, yeah, it was their hall, and they, of course, rented it for weddings and occasions like that.
Swing music band?
Oh, jeez. We had a piano player.
No.
A piano player.
Were you still playing clarinet at that time, or had you already stopped?
Yeah, I didn't play very much at that time. I pretty much quit it when I got out of college. It wasn't the same. It wasn't the same. The playing at fraternities and that sort of playing date was a lot of fun, and I couldn't recapture that, and so I just drifted away from playing it. And but weddings then were different. Today, every wedding is a nice sit-down dinner. Back then, not so much. Usually, it was like a cocktail party with champagne. Very rarely was there a dinner that I can recall of the many weddings that we attended back in those years. Things were much more, a little more modestly done, I guess, on that scale.
What was the date and year?
The date was April 23rd, 1955.
Oh, that means the big 50th is coming up.
It's coming.
It's coming up soon.
Yep.
That's exciting.
Yep.
That's something to be very proud of.
Yeah. Let's see, 55, 2005. Oh, it's next year. We just had our 49th. I've worked for a lot of companies. Yeah. I don't know. There were things I liked about most of the jobs I've had. Sometimes the good features outweigh the bad, and sometimes it's the other way around. This is, I guess, fairly typical. You can't. There's no such thing as a perfect job, but there's no such thing as a job that's all bad. Some of them seem to be all bad. I enjoyed when I always worked for smaller companies, or most of the time, and I enjoyed the developmental work. I designed and developed small instruments and devices, most of the time devices that are small enough so you could carry them in your hands, I guess. Smaller than a bread box, you might say.
Did you always make enough money to live comfortably from your job?
Well, we get by pretty well. We didn't have any surplus.
But no real hardship?
There was no hardship. I was between jobs a few times, but never for more than about 6 weeks. The lot of an engineer is sometimes rough. It's governed A lot of that is caused by the coming and going of government contracts. And while you might not be directly involved, what happens is if a big company finishes up with a contract, then they throw an awful lot of engineers on the job market. Conversely, when the big companies start getting big contracts, then there are jobs all over. And recessions and economic situations seem to govern that for at least the type of work that I was involved in. So I made a number of job changes, but I always came out pretty well with my head above water.
Now, you spent some time in the Navy as well.
Yep.
And tell me about that. Were you drafted or did you enlist?
Well, I would have been drafted. I told you I got a job deferment on my first job, and then I changed jobs. I wanted to go with the second company that I worked for, the Perkin-Elmer Corporation, and with that the draft board said, "Niet, you're 1A." In fact, Martha and I returned from our honeymoon. Among the mail that was waiting for me was a letter saying that I was now promoted to 1A. And so it was during the Korean War, it was still going on. So I had always wanted to be in the Navy. If I had to go into the service, I had always wanted to be the Navy, and never could pass the physical because I'm colorblind. But about that time, somebody told me that there is a program for engineers where they can issue a waiver on certain physical disabilities, certain physical, call it disability, okay, and you could go for it and see what happens. And the draft board said, "Okay, go for it. We'll wait until you find out what happens." At that time, the draft board was not hurting badly for recruits. They were able to fill their quota very easily in Norwalk, so that worked to my advantage. And I went and took the Navy physical and passed all the stuff except the eye test, and they gave me the waiver, and I became what's called an engineering duty officer, which is a specialist.
What year did you go into the Navy?
That would have been 55, and I got commissioned in 56, and we served. It was a 3-year obligation, and so I got out in 59.
And where was the Korean War going on at this time? Or was
it was ended by that time, yeah.
So it was considered
peacetime service.
And where were you generally stationed when you were serving?
The whole time, the whole 3 years of active service was at the Naval Air Station at Patuxent River, Maryland.
Huh.
And I never got on a ship, never once.
Did you like living down there?
Oh, it's beautiful. St. Mary's County, Maryland is a nice place. Not so good for bachelors. There's not much going on around there. There's no city. The nearest city is Washington, and that was 60 miles north of us. So the bachelors had to, single guys had to go up to Washington, and I don't know what they did, but for the married ones, it was beautiful. Nice quarters, pretty good quarters, I would say. It's right on the Chesapeake Bay, which is lovely. I had my sailboat there. And of course, Allison, our first daughter, was born there.
Down in Maryland.
Rachel's Aunt Allison.
Yeah. Auntie Asha.
She is a Navy baby.
Navy baby. Yeah. And what year was that she was born?
She was born in 57.
And you want to talk about that? That must have been pretty exciting.
Well, Martha will tell you all about it.
I'm sure you were there too.
She'll tell you a lot about it. I was there, and the prenatal care is okay, I would say, in the service. It's not maybe the very best, but they had obstetricians and GYN people that I guess were reasonably competent, and the prenatal was fine. When it came time to deliver, of course, you go to the dispensary. We didn't have a hospital on the base. It was called a dispensary, where they could do childbirth and some operations. I guess they could do something as involved as an appendectomy, but not much more than that. if a patient became, if the patient got in trouble or there was some kind of an emergency, they would just call up a helicopter and they'd have them up to Bethesda Naval Hospital in less than a half an hour. And they did that quite often. But for us, if you go in, if you have to go into the dispensary outside of normal working hours, you get whatever doctor happens to be on duty. And in our case, I believe he was a general practitioner, although he might have been an ophthalmologist, I don't know. And he had just served for 4 months up in Argentia, Newfoundland, where there are no women. So it had been a long time since he'd done any of this type of work. But he delivered Allison without any difficulty. And
So you're living in base housing with a baby, huh?
yeah, on the base.
But I'm sure many people were in similar situations.
Oh, babies were coming all the time
yeah,
there.
So,
you know, people,
there's a lot of people.
service people that age, or anybody that age, the birth rate is high.
Right. And so the hardship seems less with everyone else sharing the small quarters and.
Oh yeah, we didn't
similar
think it was so
situations.
bad. We had a 2-bedroom quarters, 2 beds, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and a tiny little kitchen. It wasn't bad, except it wasn't air conditioned, and it gets hot down there in Maryland. Hot and humid like you wouldn't believe. Right on the Chesapeake, that humidity would just roll in, and air conditioners were, you could put a window air conditioner in, which some people did. We didn't. We should have, but didn't. We got through it.
Allison was born what year again?
It was 1957.
57, and Amy was born in 65.
65.
And did you enjoy being a parent?
Oh, sure. Almost as much as I enjoy being a grandparent. Well, I don't know if there's any one specific thing. Looking back on it, I have to say there wasn't really anything too difficult, but there were times, I guess, the most difficult things, I think, is when a child gets sick, especially when you don't know what's the matter with them. And you have to kind of sweat it out a little bit. And
did you have some incidents, bad incidents like
not
that? Not
really. Maybe the worst one we had was a bout with something called roseola, which is I guess it's a type of measles that Allison got. And it only lasts for 48 hours or so, but during that time they run a terribly high fever. And she was sick, and her fever was well over 104, and we were pretty badly shook up. We were still in the Navy. Called the dispensary. The medic on duty said, well, what you do is you swab them with ice water. You got to get that temperature down. It has to come down. I said, ice water? And he said, yeah. He said, if you don't want to do it, you can bring her over here. We'll do it for you. We do it all the time. So we did what he said, and poor Allison, it was terrible.
How old was she?
She was probably 18 months. And
scary when they get sick.
you know, she could talk a little bit, and she kept saying, all better now, and I kept hitting her with this washcloth rinsed in ice water. So the next day we took her into the dispensary, and this time we got to see the chief medical officer, who was a captain, and he examined her, and he said, yeah, he said, it's roseola, that's all. And we told her about what the corpsman had us do, and he said, well, that's a little extreme, he said. He should have told you tepid water, just put her in a bathtub with tepid water. And he said, I said, what happens if the fever doesn't come down? He said, she could go into a convulsion, and then the fever comes down right away when they convulse. Didn't seem to think there was anything too serious about that, or at least he didn't let on to us that he thought it was very serious. So that had us scared. I guess one time Allison knocked her front teeth out, or let's see, she knocked one of her 2 front teeth out. That had us kind of upset, but it was a baby tooth. Allison had quite a few friends, of course, and they were given to doing certain things around the house like gardening, except we didn't quite agree 100% with the kind of gardening they did, like pulling up some of the flowers they didn't like and replacing them with things that they thought were flowers, but they turned out to be weeds. But all in all, they were both pretty good kids. Of course, they're 8 years separate, so they didn't share a lot that siblings do share when they're closer in age. But they certainly were always close, and naturally, Allison acted as a mentor for Amy.
Now, you did lose a baby during those 8 years.
Our second born was a little boy, and he died in 5 months. He never could have made it. He had an underdeveloped brain, and it was so bad that he couldn't even swallow. He had to be fed with a tube, and he wasn't expected to live for more than 2 or 3 days, but he hung on for 5 months.
He never came home. He stayed in the hospital the whole
time. The equivalent of a nursing home for children. Finally, he was in the hospital for a month or so, and then the social worker found this little hospital for children up in Cheshire, Connecticut, and he went up there and they took care of him.
Must have been very, very difficult.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I guess it affected our lives, and it affected us, and I guess you know, the effects last forever. You cope with all of that, but it's just a part of your makeup.
Right.
It's become that, and so hey,
Do you have a name?
Yeah, Douglas Alcott. So it took us a couple of years to screw up our courage. It took us more than a few years to screw up our courage, and by golly, Amy was the outcome of that.
And thus Rachel.
And Rachel.
Say hi to Rachel. Tell me about your politics. Are you conservative? Are you liberal? Do you have a particular party?
Well, I used to be a staunch Republican, and probably in the last 14 or 15 years, I've gotten away from that. I'm a registered independent. I call myself a Republican, although I voted Democrat for the last couple of elections, and I'll certainly vote Democrat for this upcoming election.
Would you consider yourself a conservative or a liberal or a moderate?
In some ways, I'm conservative. The thing that I always felt that the Republicans had a better handle on management and economics. They were more responsible economically. And now I found in the last couple of administrations, this is anything but true. And I believe the Democrats are more responsible, surprisingly. I think they have a far better outlook on monetary things. They are more conservative in many ways than the Republicans. It is they who wanted to pay off the national debt when we were running a surplus. That, to me, is a very conservative policy, and the Democrats favored that. We never paid off very much of the national debt, but at least the idea was there, and it wasn't a bad idea.
Have you ever been involved in politics at all?
Never.
Or
No, never.
Just you do vote though, elections.
Yeah, just a voter, that's all.
Now, what about religion? You do go to church quite a bit. Tell me about your religion and your religious beliefs, and your thoughts on religion.
Martha and I are both somewhat unusual in that we've been in the same church since baptism, since birth and baptism, and that's the congregational denomination. and we still are. And we've always, I guess, like most kids, I got away from it, got away from religion while I was in college and in the years after that. And what brought us, and I think Martha was somewhat the same, and what brought us back, which this often happens with people, was with the birth of Allison. And we had this baby and we decided, my gosh, here we are, we hardly ever go to church, and maybe we ought to do something about this and see that she has a religious upbringing. And that's what we did. In the Navy, we'd go to Navy chapel occasionally. There was a Navy chaplain that baptized her in the Navy chapel. But we weren't really, I guess you could say, we were not overly religious. We've become more religious since then. Maybe more liberal, I'm not sure. I don't know.
Church has been a pretty big part of your life.
Especially over the last 20 years or so, yeah.
You're a deacon in your church?
Yeah, I was.
And what does that involve?
Well, in our denomination, it doesn't require special training or anything. Unlike the Roman Catholics, their deacons have to go through quite a long training course. We don't. The deacons in our church are responsible for, actually, technically, the ministers are responsible to the Board of Deacons, and they direct the ministers, and they decide if they would like to make changes in the order of service or in the way the service is conducted, because there's no set way in our religion. Each church has wide variations on how the religious service is done. Other churches are much more rigid and more unyielding or unchanging. They have, especially the Roman Catholics, their Mass is pretty much prescribed, I believe, although even they have changed quite a bit and become more liberal. And anyhow, the Congregationalists are fairly liberal in that regard. And the deacons, that's up to the deacons. They are the primary body that's responsible for the religious side of the church. And most churches also then will have a board of trustees. The trustees are the nuts and bolts people responsible for the physical doings of the church.
Now, you said you were a deacon, you no longer are?
Well, I guess I'm still a deacon, of course, but I'm not an active deacon, not on the board of deacons. I don't have to do all the things that we did. Go to meetings and serve communion and do other services in the church. I can be called upon, and probably will be called upon, to substitute. Most of the former deacons in our church are still on the available list for that type of thing. When we're in Phoenix and we have this great big Olympic-sized pool, I do my exercise in the water and try to swim for a half an hour at a pretty good clip, if I can.
Is sailing exercise?
Sailing is really pretty good for muscle tone. You'd be surprised, especially in a small boat when there's a good wind blowing. You don't notice it while you're doing it, but when you come up to the dock and secure the boat, you realize, boy, you are tired. Early on, when we came to Norwalk, it would have been around about 1940. My father saw a boat at a gas station with a sail on it and a for sale sign on it. The boat, it was basically a rowboat with a sail, and he decided it would be nice if we got out on the water there in Norwalk Harbor. So we bought it, and we did get out on the water, and we learned all the fish that you can catch in the harbor. Good fish, weak fish were a common one to get. They were good eating. And then he started using the sail. And we didn't have a motor, so sometimes we would sail out there and dig clams and sometimes oysters, and get about maybe a bushel of them and bring them back under sail. It was really, the old traditional way. And we finally got a little motor for the boat. And when I turned about 15, I guess, I was old enough to sail the thing, and he taught me how to sail it. And I used it for a while, and then when I got older, I bought a boat of my own. It was more of a sailboat than a little sailing rowboat.
So you enjoy it a lot. And,
I've always loved sailing.
you've only sailed small boats, though.
Yeah, the biggest boat I had was only 20 feet long, and that was a nice boat.
Have you ever spent any time on a big, like, schooner or four-master?
Not a protracted period. Most of my cruising has been overnighters and cruises lasting 2 or 3 days. I've never really done any blue water sailing out in the ocean. I'm sorry to say I haven't been put to the test. I don't even know if I'd be seasick. Certainly I've never been seasick of anything that kicked up on Long Island Sound, and I've always enjoyed that.
Do you have any bad habits now or in the past?
Let's see now. I used to smoke. Yeah, I was a heavy smoker.
Yeah. And how long ago did you quit?
1965, when Amy was born.
Congratulations.
You've
got the 40th anniversary of that, as well as
I
the
guess
50th
you're right.
anniversary.
Yeah, I smoked a pack and a half a day of cigarettes since college days, I guess, and then
What brand?
usually Camels, and then I switched over to Herbert Tareytons because they had a cork tip, and I wasn't pulling skin off of my lip anymore with those. But then when the Attorney General came out with their findings,
Surgeon
which I
General.
believe, Surgeon General, in along about 1953, 63 or 64, pipes were not indicted at that time. Nobody seemed to have any objection to pipes and cigars, so I switched over to a pipe, and I smoked that for a couple of years. And one day my dentist said, "Al, I'm seeing thickening of the tissues of the palate." And I said, "Yeah, I suppose this pipe smoke will do that." And he says, "Yeah, I suppose, and that's a precancerous condition. You better quit that damn thing and go back to cigarettes, or don't smoke at all." So I quit.
Occasional drink. You ever drink more than you should?
Not recently, no. I like a drink a day. I'd have a cocktail before dinner. In our younger years, both Martha and I used to go out, and people used to drink more then, especially our contemporaries. You'd go for an evening out at a person's house, and you'd drink all evening long. And there are times when certainly I should not have been driving a car after any of those parties. And looking back on it, I feel terrible about it. We had young kids at home, and here we are, tooling along with too many under the belt. Never had an accident, but it still was not the thing to do, and I'll confess that right here and now.
Well, you're lucky. Have you ever been the victim of a crime?
No.
Have you ever committed a crime?
Not to my knowledge. Not a real felonious crime, no.
Have you ever been in a serious accident?
Not a real serious one, no.
No. Minor?
Not where there were any injuries. I had a car totaled one time, but nobody got hurt.
You were in it when it was totaled?
Yeah.
How'd that happen?
Well, I don't like to talk about this.
Oh, come on. That's what this is the dirt we want to hear.
I was waiting to make a left turn. There was traffic coming the opposite direction.
What year was it?
At a traffic light. What year? Let's see, I was still working. The car was my 87 Dodge Colt, I think. Or maybe it was an 83. I was waiting to make a left turn at a traffic light. Light turned green. There was traffic coming the other way. There were 2 lanes in each direction. And the guy in what would be the left lane oncoming was a good-sized panel truck. I couldn't see around him. And I thought there was nothing coming from the right-hand lane. So I made my left under the traffic light, and there was something coming. And it hit me right in the rear of the car, just
on the passenger side.
On the passenger side, about even with the rear. With
and
the
you were
back
alone
seat.
in the car, though.
I was alone, yeah. And it was a little light car. It pushed it quite a few feet, turned it a little bit, and course, the person that hit me was a young woman in an almost new Volkswagen, and it did a lot of damage to her car too. The cop said, well, he said, technically it's your fault, meaning me, but he said, you, turning to the woman, you were going far faster than you should have been going. So it was a combination of two bad things. And the car was, at that point, it was 4 or 5 years old, so to repair it would have cost more than what the car was worth. So it was
too
total.
embarrassing. I mean, it was sort of your fault,
It
but
was, yeah,
people have
it was
done
something
worse
that I could have avoided. That's the whole thing.
Have you ever saved anyone's life?
I don't think I ever have, no.
Did anyone ever save your life?
Well, the doctors that I've had, yeah.
Well, that leads to the next question. Have you ever had major surgery or a major illness?
Sure, yeah. That was when I had that pituitary tumor 20 years ago. And that was a serious thing. It was a benign tumor, but a difficult thing to get rid of. And I had a good surgeon, and he got it out. That was that. But I've been fine ever since.
And was that a tough recovery at all? Or?
Nope. I was out of the hospital in 4 or 5 days. The surgeon did an excellent job, and I'm sure it was dicey for him for a while. Not a high-risk operation, but not an easy one either. And there weren't a whole lot of doctors that knew how that were performing that operation at the time. But now it's done quite routinely, although I don't know that you could call it a low-risk operation even today. But the pituitary tumors are also being treated by other non-surgical means.
What are the hardest choices you've ever had to make? Choices?
Job choice. Yeah. It's worse to have 2 or more jobs offered and you don't know which one to take. That's worse than only having one. There's no question about what job you're going to take. When you get that offer, you accept it.
And so you feel you've made the right choices?
So you always wonder if you made the right choice. And I'll never know. I never would know what would have happened had I taken the other job. You can't say.
Who would you say has had the most positive impact on your life?
Golly, I guess my father. I find more now than years ago. I find that I emulate some of the things that he did more than I think, or at least I'm aware that I'm emulating some of the things that he did and some of the things that he told me. Maybe I always have, I don't know. Not that he wasn't, he certainly wasn't a perfect guy, and a lot of the stuff that he espoused was not appropriate in this day and age, which would have been very appropriate when he was this age. And that's the trouble. Old-timers like myself are liable to advise younger people in the terms that they remember when they were young, and they neglect the fact that we aren't in those times anymore. And they have to remember, you have to relate to what's going on today, and don't live in the past, or don't couch all of your advice in things that you did when you were a young person.
Is there a person who changed the course of your life by something they did, or some advice they gave you, or some specific turning point where someone had a strong effect?
Oh, let me see. Well, certainly Martha has. She's influenced a lot of the decisions. A spouse always does. There's nothing unusual about that, and she has had, her inputs have always been very good. Not that I always agreed with them, but they've still been good just the same.
Do you have a best friend besides your spouse?
Oh, I have several guys that I like very much, and certainly think a lot of. Not one person in particular, but several who I've always enjoyed being with and considered to be very good friends.
What's the most stressful or scariest thing that ever happened to you?
I'd say it was back when Douglas Alcott was born.
What
That was hard for both of us. It put a stress on our marriage and on everything else in our lives.
what helped you get through it?
Oh, we just told all our friends. Martha's parents in particular. My parents weren't quite as supportive as they were. I don't think they didn't come to grips with it in the same way that Martha's parents did, and they gave us the support we needed in exactly the right way. They were just very good with that. And I had friends and Martha had friends too, who helped a lot. The minister in our church was helpful too. But I'd say more than anything else, it was Martha's parents that got us through that. Especially her, but me too, both of us.
Not really religion, not really church.
Not quite so much, but I value that too. But the real difference was with the Alcotts.
What's have you ever had an experience that you would describe as supernatural or psychic?
Not really. No, I'm not into that. One time I was scared to death. I was doing a lot of traveling and I had a premonition. I was about to fly to California and I had a terrible premonition. And by the time I got aboard that old 707, I was a nervous wreck.
Premonition that with the plane
Yeah, I was
crash?
afraid of this. It was a perfectly normal flight. It was on time. There wasn't any turbulence. There wasn't anything out of the ordinary on that flight. It was not a thing wrong. So I fear that a lot of people get premonitions that don't mean anything or that nothing happened. You don't hear about
right,
those
you don't hear
premonitions.
about
You only
those,
hear
yeah.
about the ones that seem to predict something. So you don't hear about the ones that don't predict anything.
Do you believe in the afterlife?
I'm a little bit uncertain about that. If you believe in the Christian, all the Christian teachings, you should believe in an afterlife. I'm troubled with that. If there is an afterlife, and if you have eternal life, how do you keep from being bored? I should be asking the minister this. I just hope there's enough out there, enough jobs. And the universe is a big place, and if there is an afterlife, I hope there's enough jobs there, interesting jobs that you enjoy, to keep you going for a few thousand years. Or maybe
What do you usually dream about? If you remember your dreams, do you remember what they're
disconnected things. Very seldom a terrifying nightmare, but just embarrassing situations or situation where there's problems you can't solve, like trying to find your way to a place that you have to be at a certain time to do a certain thing, and you're miles and miles away, and you just can't seem to get your car on the right road that you have to use to get there, that sort of thing. Frustrating, but not terrifying.
What's the most amazing thing that's ever happened to you?
Oh, gee. I guess being a dad.
What's the most
Being a
embarrassing?
granddad. Being a granddad and being a dad, that's about even Steven there, you know. I shook the hand of our present president when he came up here to visit in Wolfboro. When he wasn't president, he was only a candidate for nomination.
That would be George W. Bush.
George W. Bush. Shook the hand of Eleanor Dole. Is it Eleanor? Mrs. Dole, anyway. When he and she came up here to Wolfboro, when he was a candidate, he didn't get nominated. Let's see, anybody else? Oh, well, there have been a few guys that have risen high in industry, CEOs. A lot of them have belonged to the church.
No famous actors you've ever run across or?
I've never met any of them that I can recall.
What's the most beautiful place or thing you've ever seen? from your travels?
Hmm.
I mean, it doesn't have to be a travel. It could be sunset right here.
Right. Yeah. So most of our travels have beautiful things that we've seen. It's hard to say any one stands out
It doesn't even have to be
above
from
the
the travel.
others.
My dad answered Rachel.
Well, she is beautiful, all right. I have to go along with your dad on that. I'm thinking more of things and sights that we've seen in our travels, and not that we've traveled very much, but we've enjoyed just about every place where we've been, and they've all been just
So no
just
unusual
terrific.
sights that have been unusually exquisite, Grand Canyon at sunset, that kind of thing, that has really stood out.
No, um, I was impressed with Hawaii, specifically the Diamond Head and the scenes around Honolulu, and of course we visited the memorial, the Arizona Memorial. That was very moving. But I can tell you the most moving thing, and my voice even cracks now that I think about it. That was in Normandy. Visit the site of the Normandy invasion. My favorite pet? Well, the old dog we used to have.
Sherry?
Amy and I shared that dog, Sherry.
No pet from your childhood?
We had a dog, but he was really my father's dog. I was younger then. I was like 10, 11. And I guess we had him all the time I was away at school. And the poor dog had to be put down the same day that Martha and I were married.
No.
So my mother said, gee, I lost my dog and my son in the same day.
Would you say the biggest change in the world during your lifetime is the biggest differences, the most important invention?
Politically, the collapse of communism was biggie. Winning World War II was a huge biggie. I don't know which was the bigger. Inventions, the development of nuclear power were both good and bad. I say one of the outstanding inventions is the string of Christmas lights, where you can have 50 bulbs, and when one burns out, they all keep on burning, and you can buy those strings for less than $3, and they go for years. That's a great invention.
That's pretty impressive. Okay. Is there anything you've always wanted to do but haven't?
Yeah, do some deep water, blue water sailing.
And what's the best advice you could give your grandchildren?
Oh, what works for me doesn't always work for others, but I think that they, well, should listen to the moral teachings, whether it be from their parents or their grandparents or their church. And when it comes time to pick a job, try to, if you can, try to pick a profession. All the professions are wide open now to women. A lot of them didn't used to be open to women.
Well,
Now they all are.
More than just a woman grandchild. You also have two sons. I mean, two grandsons.
That's right. Well, of course, it goes without saying the professions are wide open to them too. And just try to choose one that you think you're going to be good at and that you think you'll like. And if along the way you get disillusioned, you don't exactly like what you're studying, don't be afraid to make a change. But stick to the one you chose until you're dead certain you want to make a change, and then go ahead and make it. You don't sense tying yourself to something that you hate.
Any final words for your grandchildren and great-grandchildren who may be looking at this, and great-great-great-great-grandchildren?
Oh, boy. Well, you've got great parents, just listen to them.
What's your favorite car?
The Honda.
What's your favorite style of music?
Traditional.
What's your favorite musical instrument?
The clarinet, of course. Probably the best band. I go back to the days of the big bands, of course, and my favorite big band had always been the Glenn Miller Band, I think.
What's your favorite song?
A nice old classic called I'll Remember April, which we, incidentally, I asked the guy to sing at your party. You won't remember that, but he knew it and sang it.
Favorite movie star?
I always used to like Jimmy Stewart.
Okay. Favorite movie?
The one, let's see, that left the most The Longest Day was the one that left the most long-lasting impression, I think, and I'm not alone on that one, I'm sure.
Favorite artist?
Golly, I don't know much about art. I really don't.
At any point, you can just say none or pass. You know, go for like quick answers, whatever jumps into your head. Favorite painting?
Like everybody else, I was fascinated with the Mona Lisa. I don't know why, but I was.
Favorite poet?
From what little I've read of Longfellow, I certainly love his stuff, and I know very little about his works, but I've read some.
Favorite TV program?
Law and Order, yeah, that's a good one.
Favorite author?
Ken Follett, I can say him definitely.
Favorite book?
Ken Follett's first book, The Eye of the Needle.
Favorite season?
Spring, probably.
Tree?
Pine trees.
Favorite flower? Oh
boy, that's I like a lot of them. I guess the iris or the flag.
Favorite holiday?
4th of July.
Favorite color?
Oh, yellow.
No, come on, we rehearsed this one.
They all look the same, so I like them all.
Oh, I thought the answer was going to be great.
Yeah, they all look great.
Favorite sport?
As a spectator, football.
Favorite athlete?
Oh, so many, but my favorite athlete is not in my favorite sport. It's Barry Bonds.
Okay. Favorite animal?
Dogs.
Favorite meal?
Filet mignon.
Favorite fruit?
Apple.
Vegetable?
Carrot.
Candy?
Chocolate.
Cookie?
Chocolate chip.
Favorite drink?
Scotch.
Favorite restaurant?
Well, we certainly love up here in New Hampshire, the Woodshed.
Favorite flavor of ice cream?
Chocolate.
Favorite board game?
Chess.
Favorite card game?
Bridge.
Uh,
I'm not wild about it, but if I had to pick a card game to play, I guess I'd say bridge.
okay. Did you think of that singer? Favorite singer?
What was her name? Golly, she was good. Not too well known. Sang with Louis Prima. That goes back a ways.
Oh, yeah, I remember her name.
Jeez.
Why do I want to say Keeler? Ruby something?
Was it Keeley?
Yeah, Keeley. Yeah, Keeley. Keely Smith.
Keely
maybe?
Smith.
Keely Smith.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
there
it.
we go.
That's it.
Okay, so favorite singer?
Keely Smith.
Bingo. How about favorite granddaughter?
Oh, now. Well, so far it sure is Rachel, and I think that's what it's always going to be. I think
You
that's
never
you
can tell.
can take that to the bank.
Okay, we may be doing this again.
Oh, well.
So that will do it, Al. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, monkey.
What's that thing there? What's that thing? Oh yeah, you've seen. Yeah, you want to put it in your mouth
See
next.
your
I'll
face
bet.
there?
Oh yeah.
What do you see there?
She's gonna start teething on your lens cap.
Okay. So, Al, who's your favorite granddaughter?
Well,
You got
of my own, my favorite granddaughter, of my granddaughters, is sitting right here. Now there are other people who have other granddaughters. If you want my favorite other person's granddaughter, well, I think that Abby Rosen ranks
Oh.
pretty high
good
for
for her.
another person's granddaughter, but we know so many others, it's hard to choose. Yeah, right. It's TikTok. It's TikTok. Oh, where? Everybody has to learn TikTok. You'd like to put it in your mouth, wouldn't you? Huh? You can't quite get that in your mouth, but you're gonna try. Oh, gesundheit.